I tweeted this out a long time ago. I said, I have a new hero, and his name is Dan Porter. You're here, and today you're going to show people why that is true.
Listen, I wasn't a gamer, and I made a pretty popular game. I didn't know a lot about ticketing, and I started the first live event ticketing company. I like sports. I'm not a sports wizard. I don't know. You just do shit.
You're fun as shit to talk to.
Can you talk about a couple of the things that you did intentionally that you think helped build the cult brand?
The 1 second piece of advice I would give is that
I'll start with a few facts. Number one, this is a guest I have been waiting for to come on the podcast for years. And the reason why is because I have, Dan, you don't know this, but I've had all these fantasies, these entrepreneurial fantasies in my life. There's a part of me that's like, you know what? One day I'm going to make a hit social app and 100 million people are going to use it. I'm going to sell it for hundreds of millions of dollars. You've done that. I have this other fantasy that, no, I'm going to go change education. I'm going to start a big nonprofit. I'm going to be the leader of that. I'm going to help grow that thing. And I'm going to help change the way that education works in America. You've done that. Part of me wants to go to Hollywood and work with the power brokers, the people who are in that world. You've done that. Part of me wants to create a brand that's like, part of the culture that in the world of sports takes off. You've done that. Part of me wants to own a sports league. You've done that. You have done basically all the things that I've ever wanted to do. I tweeted this out a long time ago. I said, I have a new hero, and his name is Dan Porter. Nobody knew who the hell I was talking about. Nobody knew why I was saying that. I didn't give any context, but you're here, and today you're going to explain to the people, you're going to show people why that is true.
That's an amazing intro, especially for somebody whose Twitter game is as lame as mine. I appreciate that. I would subtext that with clearly jack of all trades, master of none.
Well, I want to start with the story because your stories are legendary. You came to our basketball camp, Camp FFM, and you didn't even play basketball, which is the best part. You were my favorite person there, and you didn't even play basketball, which is the funniest part. Can you tell the story of OMGPop and what happened there?
Yeah. So OMGPop was a gaming website built entirely in Flash. Started with this incredibly creative guy, Charles Foreman, who grew up playing Game Boys in his garage and was like, I wish the internet could connect us to play together. And we made a ton of really fun games, and we actually had success. And it's a weird story because in some ways, like, we imagine that businesses either succeed or fail, but what happens like if you're in the middle? And we had millions of people who played our games. The problem is that Farmville came out and they had 100 million people who played their games. And all of a sudden, millions of people who played your games was kind of way lamer than 100 million people who played your game on Facebook. And we did our thing, but then the world changed and it was Facebook games and it was all of these other things. And so at what point do you come back to the board and you're just like, well, we're kind of running out of money, and they're like, well, why do we want to invest in something that is good but not great? And so I remember we went back and we were like, okay, so let's say that we cut all the snacks. Like, how much runway would that increase for us? And the answer was 1 day. And at some point, you're just like, well, am I in the runway extending business? Am I in the business of taking something that is good but not great and just continually taking money over and over time? And so I think at that point you kind of have that realization, and the board is sitting around, they're like, oh, we can raise money, we can borrow money. And you're just like, well, what happens if like we did some cool shit? It just wasn't cool enough. And so, yeah, I just said like, maybe this is just kind of the end. And we're just going to make some more games and see what happens. And maybe we're going to go out of business and a couple million people will be sad, but, not 100 million. And so it's kind of what we did. And in that process, I just thought like, let's make one or two more games. And we had this one very big game that everybody in the company that was working on, a more kind of complicated game. And so I said, I'd like to at least try to make the last game that we make, even though I'm not a game designer. I think I've worked here and I've kind of like internalized it. And I think that as a sidebar, one of the cool things about working in the gaming space is it changed your mindset so that you're kind of you're always one game away from something changing the trajectory of the company. And if you're in a website or an app or a product business, that's dangerous because you always believe like, oh my God, I'm just one feature away. If I just enable push notifs, if I just add this other thing, then my app is going to be gigantic. And that can be an illusion, which is challenging. But in a portfolio theory, kind of a games company is almost like a portfolio of a bunch of smaller startups in some ways. And even if you look at overtime, we have basketball, we have football, we have a media company, and they all kind of roll up to some big vision, but they're also a portfolio of different types of bets in some way. And so I think that definitely impacted my thinking. But I was just thinking, okay, like we're going to make 1 or 2 more games. Let's see what happens.
How much time did you have?
4 months, 5 months left.
Damn.
And did you believe, or where was the belief? Because, startups are a roller coaster. You have the initial surge where this is going to be awesome. You have the trough of despair, the trough of sorrow where it feels like nothing's working. And then sounds like you were at the end. Where was the morale at the time?
I didn't get up on a podium and say, hey, y'all, we're going to be out of business in 5 months, so polish up that resume. And we had millions of users. I mean, our average time on site was like 4.5 hours. And people loved us. It's just that the scale at which they loved us was not the scale at which was happening when Facebook transformed the gaming business. And of course, like all the money is focused on you. And then they're like, oh shit, bright, shiny object, Zynga, Farmville, anything that ends in Ville. And they all ran over there and you're like, hey, what's up? A couple million users, and they're like, cool.
All right, guys, really quick. So back when I was running The Hustle, we had this premium newsletter called Trends. The way it worked was we hired a ton of analysts, and we created this sort of playbook for researching different companies and ideas and emerging trends to help you make money and build businesses. Well, HubSpot did something kind of cool. So they took this playbook that we developed and we gave to our analysts, and they turned it into an actionable guide and a resource that anyone can download. And it breaks down all the different methods that we use for spotting upcoming trends, for spotting different companies that are going to explode and grow really quickly. So if you want to stay ahead of the game and you want to find cool business ideas or different niches that most people have no idea they exist, this is the ultimate guide. So if you want to check it out, you can see the link down below in the description. Now back to the show.
And so we're like, wow, we made these web-based games, but it's about social games and it's about, mobile games. And so, you have 4 to 6 months left. And at some point, I think you hit this point where you're just like, maybe it is just going to go out of business. Like, whatever they say in Wall Street, don't fight the tape. And like, all we're going to do is do our best. Like, we're not going to mortgage the house and do all these other things like that to stay in business for the sake of staying in business. And, we got a couple shots. So we have this big game everyone's working on. And I think I'm just like, I'd like to make a game, and maybe I can make a game, and maybe I'm like super arrogant or really deluded or completely out of touch. But like, we have this kind of fun drawing and guessing game that we've been making on the internet. And like, maybe we could make it as a social game off in the corner. So everybody in this 50-person company is making a game, and I'm in the corner with like an outsourced dev and 2 people on my team. And I don't know a ton about making games, but the game seems fun. And I just have this instinct that like, wow, the phone is a communications device. And yet every game that's popular on the phone is basically a single player game. And so we're back in this like, okay, everybody is a Game Boy, but they're actually connected in some way. So could we do something social? And so I start trying to make like a version of this game, which was called Draw My Thing at that time, which I think might have been a little intentionally racy. And basically like every Friday we would make a version of it and I would try to play it. And I'm really dumb and I'm not good at games and I can't read instructions and I have a lot of limitations in that space. I clearly can't even hoop really. And so I just play the game and I just be like, how can this game be simpler? I don't really understand it. And I'd recognize every Friday when I played it on the subway home, like, wow, this is really fun. And I get it. And this isn't. And so we kind of get to that point. We rename it, draw something. And we're like kind of last gasp of the company. And we try to promote it to our audience, to our couple of million people we have. Hey, we got this new game. It's based on this other thing. And it's in my mind, it is kind of this Hail Mary, but you can't run a company and go like, hey guys, we're going to be out of business in 4 months. And by the way, this is our Hail Mary, or else literally everybody in the entire company would have a psychic breakdown. So they're working on this other game with fighting and all this other stuff. And we kind of like release this game and we give a lot of promotion so everybody knows about it. And the game kind of like climbs the chart, right? Because on day one, like 30 or 40,000 people download it because we've given them free coins on our website to do that. And it blips up a little bit and it blips up a little bit more. And then it kind of crashes down. And you're just like, okay, so what have we learned? Dan Porter definitely not as smart as he thought he was. Probably not a real game designer. And looks like it's not going to save the company. And that's the nature. And we try some other promotion. And before the weekend, like a week out, one of the back-end developers comes to me and he says, I think there's something broken in the game because like there are all of these calls being made in the game and like they're not going through. And he's like, I think Chris and I, his name was Jason, are going to stay all weekend. We're going to try to fix the back end of the game. And I'm like, cool. Like, what's the downside of that? So they stay and they rewrite the entire back end of the game over the weekend. But then we have to submit it to the App Store. And at that time, you'd submit it to the App Store and it might take a week or two for it to get approved. And so I call a famous investor who everybody knows, who had written a seed check in us and wrote a lot of seed checks. And I said, listen, I just need this one favor. Like if they could actually review the game and put it up in a day or two, it might be huge for us. And he says, I can help you, but A, you never get to ask me another favor. B, one day in 12 years, when you're on Sam and Shaan's podcast, you can't use my name so that other people don't ask me. So blank, I'm not using your name. And I'll see what I can do. He does it. It goes in the App Store. He uses his cloud and all of a sudden it's updated. And what had been happening was that the game was actually spreading like wildfire, but nobody could download it and they couldn't play it once they had downloaded it, or they had downloaded it and it didn't work. So they fix it, whatever. And the thing just like blows up. It just like goes through the roof. And all of a sudden it's the number one game in Sweden. And the colors were blue and yellow. So people were like, oh, they must be confused about the Swedish flag. I was like, I think they're a smart peoples. Maybe they just like the game. And it started getting really big there. And then weirdly, it started getting really big in small liberal arts colleges. And in Minnesota and all these other places. I think what happened was that we were really successful at two things: making a game that was really simple to understand and play. And ultimately, like grandmas played, like it was super broad. And the second thing was making a game that really had just insanely powerful word of mouth. But word of mouth works in a very small, tight-knit community. So it works in a liberal arts college of 5,000 people. It works in a country like Sweden, you know, at a giant university or somewhere else, it doesn't. And so it just starts to grow. And
well, what's the time frame of this?
I would say literally day by day. Like in the first 9 days, we got to 1 million downloads. And then in the first 50 days, we got to 50 million downloads. The only app that was in front of us was fucking Flashlight. Because at that time, the iPhone didn't have a flashlight and somebody make a mid. And every day I came in, I was like, oh, fucking kill Flashlight. We got to be more popular than the Flashlight is.
And this is like in 2010 or something?
It's 2012.
12. Yeah, of course I played it. I mean, everyone played that game, right? I mean, how many users did you end up having?
So it just blows up. It just becomes the number one game in like every country in the world for 6 months straight. So I would say on a DAU basis, we had at least 25 million people playing every day, which was gigantic. At that time, we ultimately were downloaded 250 million times. And all of a sudden, it was just everywhere. And then everyone came to me and they're like, we need influencers to make this big. And someone's like, I know Cristiano Ronaldo's manager. And I was like, that's really fucking random, but like, I'll do whatever. And then a week later, they come in and they're like, Miley Cyrus is tweeting about it. And like all these celebrities are tweeting about it. It has nothing to do with me. It's like, if you make something that's popular in culture, like everybody does it. And I remember I ended up making a game show with Ryan Seacrest. And I was like, how did you find out about this game? He's like, all the all the people who sat in the front of the studio, like secretaries and the assistants and the bookers, they were just playing it all day and they were laughing their ass off. And I keep coming over and I was like, what are you guys laughing at? And they're like, this game. And so in this weird way, especially in this influencer world, like there's this level of traction that you get where people just participate in it because it's part of culture.
You were like the Haktua girl before she was around, dude.
Exactly. I just managed to stay around for 6 months as opposed to like 3 days on Twitter. But you could tell by watching on Twitter, I actually think that we were one of the first games that ever kind of broke on Instagram because it was so visual. If you Google draw something and look at Google Images, there's billions and billions of images around it. And there were all these funny things about it. Number one, like we didn't put any sharing capability in it. So there was just no way to share. And that was like the antithesis of what everyone did. And so what happened was people just took screenshots of their drawings and they just texted and posted. And in this weird way, because you didn't ask celebrities to talk about it, they talked about it. Because you didn't ask people to share, they shared it. And I remember at some point, like I was walking through Zynga's headquarters and they eventually bought the game. And there were a bunch of developers and they were trying to figure out the game and trying to like map it so they could copy it. And one of them said to me, why didn't you put XP in this game? I mean, every good game has XP. And I thought, oh, fuck, you're right. I meant to do that, but I hadn't done it. And so it ended up just being this kind of organic game that we knew a lot about, but that was built by kind of a regular person and then just played by regular people. And I'll tell you one kind of like geeky game thing about it is that I understood from our site that if you came onto our site and you played a game, if you and Sam played and Sam won, 50% of the time you would never come back to the site again. So let's say it was even checkers. The first time you lose at checkers, you're like, F this site, this isn't fun, and you lose. So what does that say to you about running a gaming site where literally somebody's going to lose and then you're going to lose them as basically as a customer? And so in my head, I was like, I need to figure out this way that you could have a game where nobody loses. And that's like that's like one of those riddles, like which is the door you knock on to get into heaven or hell or other things like that. What is the game that has no winners and losers? And so one day I was in Prospect Park with my younger son, Miles, and his friend, and they were throwing the football. And I was like, listen, if you guys can throw and catch it 50 times in a row, I'll take you for ice cream. Because basically I'm just trying to get them to collaborate. And they were like, oh, it's like a streak. We're going to keep doing it. And I was like, oh my God, there's no winner and loser. Like they're both winners in this game. And so I'm just like, oh, you're going to have streaks and draw something. Like the more you can go back and forth and everybody's a winner and all this other stuff. So it's fun for everyone involved. So there are all these kind of non-game moments in life. And subsequently, somebody at Snap told me, oh yeah, we took that idea of streaks from what you guys had done in that game. And it's not like I was like in some lab cooking up amazing like ideas about internet and the future of gaming. It was just kind of like, I was just this regular person observing, trying to answer some of these existential questions and looking around me. And I wasn't a gamer, so I didn't really use XP. And I was like looking for the ways that what made people laugh and what made them smile. And the biggest thing is, listen, if the first game was called Draw My Thing, what do you think people draw in the game? Like, this is not hard.
Well, that's something you and Shaan actually have that in common. You have both owned social apps where drawing penises was one of the main features.
Core activity.
And I remember this like very long board meeting where they were like, you know, we're going to use optical character recognition and we're going to recognize every dick in the game and then we're going to blank it out. And this other board member's like, it doesn't matter whether it goes to the left or the right. We're going to figure it out and we're going to just get it out. And I just thought like, wow, that sounds really hard. And it's like, here lies Dan Porter. He figured it on his grave. He figured out how to use like early artificial intelligence to spot, you know, DICKS games and stuff like that. And so ultimately, I just made this change where it's like, you could only play with your friends. Because I just figured like, okay, so like, whatever, you send your friend something like that, they either laugh or they're like, dude, come on, just send me a real drawing. And it's just kind of like one of these moments where it's like you're trying to solve this problem. And the reality is the solution for the problem is actually something that's like bigger in a way like that. Like I'll tell you a really dumb story. I had like terrible knee pain. And it's like at some point I was climbing stairs and I started wearing like pads on my knees. And I finally went to a doctor. I went to like an NFL doctor and I'm thinking he's going to tell me I need knee surgery. He does all these things to me. And he says, listen, lie on the table. It's like, I'm going to touch your heels to your butt. And I'm like, it really hurts. He's like, yeah, your quads are so freaking tight. You have nothing to do with your knee. What you think is the problem is completely not the problem. You just need to stretch out your quads. And I was like, oh my God, I just avoided knee surgery, and B, learned one of the greater lessons in life, which is you think it's this input output, but there are all of these things that are around it. It's like not about recognizing, the dicks in your game. It's about changing some other structure around you. It's about figuring out how to stretch out your quads.
I think we found your biography title. It's not about the dicks of the
exactly.
game.
Hey, Dan, were you? I know you had a business before this, but were you financially successful before starting this company, or was it like this has to work, otherwise I'm broke and I got to start over?
I was kind of like us. I wasn't like my parents were college professors, so I didn't have a ton of money. I had been a public school teacher and worked in nonprofit education before this. So I didn't really have a massively lucrative career. I was average. I mean, I couldn't stop working, but, I didn't have to eat ramen every day. But yeah, this game and this company was the chance to completely change the trajectory of my life and my family's life from a financial perspective, without a doubt.
I think the insight about, why do people stop playing my game? You sort of invert. Instead of how to make everyone play my game, it's why would somebody not play a game? Well, because they lose and they feel bad. And so you're like, can you make a game where people don't lose and feel bad? And the beautiful thing about the streak is, let's say we lost. Well, we're playing together. We're collaborating. I almost feel like I owe you to play again. So instead of churning out because I lost, I'm like, no, I got to make up for that. My bad. I dropped the ball. Let's start the streak again. And I definitely have to play because I'm the one who cost us the streak. That was the first thing. I also loved, this game was amazing, dude. This was like my flirt game. You were basically my wingman. I didn't even know you at the time. I got a girlfriend through Draw Something because it was such a simple game. You download it and immediately it's like, draw this. The beauty of it was it would show the other person almost like a playback of you drawing it. For those who didn't play this game, it's like, I don't remember the exact mechanics. It's like you have to draw, it'll tell you what to draw. You start to draw it. The other person doesn't know what you had to draw. They have to guess. And it would show you like kind of start, stopping, erasing. And it was really funny to see people's kind of like mistakes as they were drawing the thing. And you could only be so good. Like nobody could really be that great unless you're really, really talented, because it's a finger on a little iPhone screen. So the expectations were low too. And I just thought, like, I remember the first time I saw that, it lets you watch the other person draw the thing, and that makes you laugh. And then that makes you feel connected with this person, because it's like almost like both sides are like a little vulnerable in a way, right? You're embarrassing yourself. It's like playing charades. It makes you like each other more. And I remember thinking, this is genius. And this game is so simple. There's been so many people come on this podcast to say the same thing. It's like, well, my back was against the wall. Like, we didn't really have another choice. I wasn't an expert at this thing, but I just wanted to make a game that would be really fun to play. And every week we would make it, and every Friday I would play test it. And then I'd just try to figure out what I could do to make it a little bit better than it was just that Friday. I'll try to make one tweak. And I just did that one tweak at a time. And sure enough, that actually resulted in a great product. It's not this like highly complex, convoluted, grand theory approach to making things successful.
No, totally. I mean, people used to say to me, I love that game, but I'm not really that good at drawing. And I was like, that's the kind of the point of the game. Like, there were people who had pens and iPads who could draw great things, but it should be accessible to everyone. Weirdly, we released a game, and within a week, there were 5 games that were released that were similar, but we were the only game that had the playback. And you know how people always say, like, the greatest thing about the iPhone is when they text you that code, and it lets you hit that little thing and it puts the code in anything you're filling out. Like, it's just like sometimes there's some aspect of the product that doesn't seem like the core aspect, but it's so great. And to your point, it wasn't just the drawing, it was the erasing. It made you feel like there was a live person on the other side of it. And that really was the point of it. And then there were a lot of other just like really totally random, goofy things. Like, I don't think I've ever said this before, but like, in the beginning, there'd be a little screen and these letters would make a word. And the word it made was Manchul, Manchul. Manchul, aka Chul, was one of our developers. And we just punked him and just put his name in the beginning of the thing. And nobody ever said anything. And after Zynga bought it for like 2 years, they left it up there and you'd open it and it wouldn't say like, draw something or whatever. It would just say Manchul. It was like this, just like, you just put these weird things in there just because you can. And because, listen, you could say from a strategy, look, if I'm not having fun, how can I make sure that the people who are doing the drawings are having fun?
And you sold it for like what, $200 million to Zynga?
Yes.
And that was when Zynga was at its peak.
That was like 5 to 6 weeks after the game really kind of came out and burst. Like we sold it. It happened so fast.
No way. 6 weeks?
Yeah. So that was like the crazy turnaround. So they hired 2 law firms. One worked the first 12 hours of the day on the deal, and then the other one worked the second 12 hours of the day of the deal. And the whole deal got done in 9 days. And I'm like, have like all this paperwork and I'm trying to run around and figure it out.
How did it happen? So the game's blowing up and what? You get an email from Mark Pincus or how does that happen?
The game's blowing up, and not only is it so big, it's literally sucking the user base out of every single other game on the market. And so that's Zynga, that's EA, that's like everybody else who's about to report earnings and talk about their DAU and MAU. And, you know, I have these videos of the download numbers and the counter is just broken because there's, you know, there's a million drawings happening every 5 seconds. And so, you know, Mark knew somebody on my board. They invited me to the headquarters. I was a joker, so I entered my name as Dr. Dre from the company NWA coming in. I thought maybe somebody would know I was there or whatever. Ultimately, there were 5 or 6 companies that were really interested in buying it because it was just, the trajectory was so big. And I think they were playing offense. Like they clearly was like, these guys are some mobile game savants. And I think they were playing defense because they were bleeding all of their users across everywhere.
And the deal closed 6 weeks after Draw Something went live. That's got to be one of the fastest close, like launch to close times ever.
It was insanely fast. And the funny thing is that I went to GDC, which is a game developer conference. And the year before I went, and like nobody knew who I was. And it just so happened that it happened at the peak moment of the game. And I went and like everybody knew who I was. But then I could meet with like seriously like every buyer like in 2 days because everybody was in San Francisco for that conference. And we also got a term sheet for $50 million, which I had folded up and put in my pocket and went to an event and I dropped it and I couldn't find it. And I only had the printout. So I had a rough idea of what the terms were, but it was on the floor of some party somewhere. And I came back and I asked kind of like the OGs who had been there for 4 or 5 years, since there were only 7 of us. And we were working above like a combination Taco Bell, Dunkin' Donuts, where the smell was different on which side of the room you were on. And I was like, do you guys want to raise money and like build something really big? Or do you want to sell the company? And they were like, sell the company. And I get it. They had put 5 years of their life. They were at a pivotal time in their life and it was life-changing for them. So I think that was a decision. And I think people ask me a lot of times also, listen, we were really, really good at making games and we made a really popular game and we were good at the community management and the social media around it. But you take $50 million and you spend a lot of that on building a legal team, building a sales team, building all these commodity things that I didn't think we were necessarily going to be better than anyone else at. So we just wanted to be in a place where we could make games.
How did you negotiate the price?
The buyers came back and they were like $120, $150 million. The board was ecstatic.
Well, where'd they come up with that number?
I think they were looking at probably, we were making a ton of money because we had so many screens in the game when you go back and forth and back and forth. So we're generating out of advertising revenue. You're looking at, you know, roughly kind of how much is an MAU or a DAU interesting to you. And so we bring it to the board and the board is ecstatic because we go from being like, oh, should we essentially wind this thing down to now we have this thing that's popular and somebody wants to buy it. And so they're like, great, like $120 million. I was like, this thing is worth $250 million because like anyone, I'm extremely high on my own supply at that time. And, you know, there's this moment where basically the message they're saying to me is like, you're the CEO, but it's not your company. It's our company. Like, you don't control this thing. And there's kind of a subtle message from me to them being like, well, fine, fucking sell this thing without me, because this thing is worth so much money. And that's 50% complete delusion and arrogance and adrenaline and all the other things that happen. When you're in the desert and you have a couple million users and now you have hundreds of millions of users. And part of me thinking like, maybe I actually am right. And like, maybe it is worth more. And so they give me this small window and I go back, bluster, draw something's the greatest thing. Somebody tweets like, Y Combinator pitch, the draw something of X. And, that matters to all of those people. And so I go back and I'm like, I need this and I need that and I need this. And, it's a gamble, but it was right. Like, we got way more money and a way better deal because a segment of the buyers really, really needed it because they were telling results. The hit to their stock was bad. Somebody like EA was invested in sports games. Somebody like a Zynga was over-invested in Farmville. You have strategic imperative to people. So sure, you're super valuable, but they're all playing a much bigger game. And if you can understand that, that's where your leverage is. And then boom, all of a sudden we do that. I come back. I'm like, the company's sold. And it's, this whole crazy kind of episode. And the funniest thing to me is like, I start reading all of these things like why draw something succeeded. And then these other articles, why draw something failed. And, when you're an entrepreneur, you read a ton of these and you come back and you're like, did you see these? You tell your team, you see this article? We need to be doing this. And the reality is that every single article was wrong. Like, it was completely wrong. Like, their analysis was wrong. Like, there was this whole thing about why we failed, but they were analyzing our iPad app and we didn't have an iPad app. We just had a stretched out mobile app for iPad. And then all of a sudden you just realize, oh shit, I've been reading these articles as an entrepreneur about why things succeeded and failed. I've been making decisions and they were probably wrong there. And now when it's happening to me, they're really fucking wrong. But it was this like crazy ride. And then all of a sudden, we're part of Zynga. And then all of a sudden a year later, I'm not working there. So it was an amazing rise and fall, totally turned around the company, saved us. And we did a whole bunch of things. There were a bunch of employees who I had to let go. And I just made the decision on my own to rehire them like the day before the deal closed so that their options would still vest. There were people who had taken more cash than stock because they had little kids, and I got a cash component that I could use at my discretion. And so I just gave them the money that they would have made. There's just this chance to do like all this insanely non-capitalist, but like super cool shit to change people's lives. And after the deal closed, they had a debt-free club where all the employees who had college loans all paid off their college loans. And there's a moment when you have a little bit of money left in your bank account, and that's going to go to the other company. So I ran to the Apple store in Soho. They used to love me, and I bought $100,000 worth of iPads and all this stuff, and I just gave it out to everybody who worked at the company. And every now and then somebody will text me, and they're like, I still have that iPad from 2012. And so all of a sudden you just do kind of all the cool, fun shit that they would never teach you to do in business school. They'd teach you to do the opposite. But you can do it because you have this superpower, which is not only does somebody want your company, but you have this ability to impact the lives of all these people who've given you their all for the last 5 years. And to me, that was the coolest part of it.
Sam, one of the things I love about Dan is we meet a lot of founders and entrepreneurs, and almost all of them, I would actually say 80, 90% of them will say, it's not about the money. Money's not the biggest thing for me. I would say most people want that to be true. And then you go look at their actions and it's like, those people are the most transactional. They're the people that want the money the most. And they want to not want the money, but they want the money. And I'm guilty of that too. Dan is one of the few people I met.
I believe it.
Who plays a game with money. It's not that money doesn't matter to you, but he's told me a bunch of stories of it wasn't about the money. Like, he made a decision that was actively not money driven or not even like logical, but he just does it for the fun and for the kicks. It's like the Joker in Batman, right? Like, most people want to be Batman. Dan, I feel like you want to be Joker, where you're just like, I just want to see what happens.
Well,
if I do this, what if I tie up this person you love over here and this person over here? Who are you going to go get? I can't wait to find out.
Have you read his LinkedIn? So his LinkedIn's pretty hilarious. So it starts with, I think you were the president of Teach for America. When I think of Teach for America, I think of like kind of hippie-ish, like do good for the world type of vibe. Then you go to gaming, which is, in my opinion, the gamers are typically like the hardest core capitalists there are. It's just like you're practically working on an Excel sheet on how to change things. But then, so you got this like weird hippie side, but then you're also this capitalist. But then his LinkedIn, Shaan. So after selling Draw Something, he goes to work for Arie Emmanuel at Endeavor, who Shaan and I love. We love reading about Arie. Listen to what he says. He goes, I told Arie to pass on 5 companies for investing that he ignored me, and he invested in them anyway. All of them are now out of business. Know what you know, my guy. He's got this like shithead vibe that I love. And then he's also like does good stuff for America and is also this like greedy capitalist. He's the perfect combination of like being a holistic, balanced human being. I love it.
I appreciate those nice words. I will say, I understand what it's like to, be average or not have no money, but not have any spectacular upside. And also, I would say like there's 2 things that really motivated me. One was somebody who once said to me, he was kind of Oprah's manager and helped her be really big. And when I was in my 20s, he once said to me, the most powerful people are the people who know how to give up power. And not a lot of people say things to me that I either remember or have an impact, but I just always was like, wow, that's so interesting. It is like, it's not hard to be powerful and consolidate power. It's way harder to be powerful and somehow let go of power. And I think there's some aspect you could substitute money or anything else like that. Sure, like Zynga said, here's $5 million in cash. I could have put that whole thing in my own bank account if I wanted to. And sure, do I wish I had that money today? Sure, who doesn't? But like to be able to release that and give it to other people and change their lives it's just fucking cool. And then I would say to me, like, and I told this to staff the whole time, the number one thing that motivated me was every day I rode the subway and every day people played games on their iPhone. And I was just like, I want to make a game that people play on their iPhone. And I remember there was a point at which the game was so big. It was like everybody I knew was playing it. It was everywhere. And I was walking my dog with one of my kids in Prospect Park, and there was like this couple, and they were like canoodling on a bench, and they were laughing. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I wonder if they're playing Draw Something. I got to go check it out. So I kind of like walk behind the bench, and I look over, and they're playing it. And I think in that moment, I'm like, cool. But of course, I can't help myself. I tap them on the shoulder, and I'm like, I made that game. And they were like, looked at me like I was like a stalker, and they were like, oh, cool. And they went back to doing what they were doing. But to me, it's the same thing. It's like I walk through an airport and I see some kid wearing an overtime shirt, and I just think like, that's fucking cool. Like I made that. Everyone who I work with, we made that. And like the fact that you can make something that's out in the world that people love, they don't even know you have anything to do with. I did a whole music festival when I was at Virgin. And I remember standing on stage next to Richard Branson, and like Roger Daltrey and the Who were screaming, and like dads have their kids on their shoulder. There's like 80,000 people there. And I'm thinking like, I was a spark that like made this happen. And I'm not interested in these people ever knowing who I am. Like, that's not the point. The point is you made something and it existed in the world and it touched people who have no idea who you are. And I just can't tell you how fucking existentially cool that is.
Can I ask you a little bit about Branson and Arie? So yeah. Shaan and I have been on this Arie Emmanuel kick because he's not probably like us at all in that he's significantly more intense, go, take over the world. Shaan and I care a little bit more about just having our ideal lifestyle. But then you've got Branson. So you said the guy was like, it's more about who can release power. So Branson seems like a guy where it's like decentralized. Arie's like a guy where it's like he's the boss and it's a little bit more dictatorship. This is just an outsider's observation. But what can you say about the difference between the two of them and what attributes each person had that made them kick ass?
Yeah, so let me say, like, Arie is an amazing guy, and I learned a ton working for him. And Richard is also an amazing guy. I would say in Arie's case, when I worked at WME before they bought IMG, before they bought UFC, 3 months into it, people were like, what is it like to work there? And I was like, it's the greatest fucking Jewish family dinner you've ever been. You just sit around the table and everybody's screaming at each other at the top of their lungs, but they actually love each other. And I had just never worked in an environment like that. Like, Arie will walk into somebody's office, he said, listen, you fucking schmuck, what about this and that? And they're like, that's not true. And I'm like, wait, they're yelling at each other, but they love each other? It was actually wild. And I think that Arie's an example of somebody in a number of ways. One is he's relentlessly curious. Like, he reads, he consumes information. There's nothing he doesn't want to learn about. And I think that is this incredible spark for him and within the company to clearly, like Richard, but in a different way, he has an incredible amount of personal charisma, but he uses his personality to his advantage. And in a way, the person he actually reminded me the most of who I worked with later was actually David Stern, the former NBA commissioner. Because I'd be in a room with David and we'd be talking about basketball and he'd look at me and say, listen, Dan, I get it. You're good at raising money, but are you fucking good at anything else? Because clearly it doesn't seem like you are. And so it's almost like this Catskill comedian style of using humor and your personality that's probably rooted in some Jewish humor and whatever, that says to you, hey, maybe you should turn left instead of going straight here, but I'm going to say it in a way that is funny, but you get what I'm saying. And that's going to make you love me in the end too. And I think that Arie is very, very funny and was very good at that by strength of personality. And also he could call you every single day.
That's how he recruited you, right? What's the story of how he recruited you?
When he wanted me to work there, he just decided he wanted me to work there, and he called me every single day for 4 months.
And what did he say?
He would just be like, we have all this IP, we need to do this, you should come here. And then I'd go to talk, and I'd realize he wasn't there anymore. And that's the problem with cell phones.
Wait, did he hang up without saying bye?
Yeah,
that's awesome.
That's what the agents do. They roll calls, a list of 300 people. Hey, how you doing, Larry, David, good, whatever. And then he's on to the next one. And they understood it. And I was an idiot. I just wasn't from that environment. So I didn't really understand it. So I'd be talking and I'd look and I'd just see the time on my phone because he'd have hung up and he'd on to the next call. And I just think there's this incredible personal force and momentum that he has. And sometimes I think for some people, they have that, but it can lead to a really toxic work environment and there are all kinds of exposures. I think he loves life. He enjoys everything. He's very funny. And I think he could have both of those in a way. And he was good at understanding what made you tick and connecting with that. I think Richard is really different. Richard is very laid back, but very cool. And I remember going to this meeting at Virgin Mobile in Canada, and he wanted to talk to all the people in the phone room, the customer support people. And people just don't do that. And he basically just tells them this story about when he lost his virginity, no pun intended. And it's this very funny story where he humanizes himself and he's just this regular guy. And he's not talking to the C-suite. He's talking to all people who answer the phone. And they just leave that thing and they think, fucking love Richard Branson. He is the man. And it's just charisma. It's just different for each of them. And it's very rooted in what their brand is. Their brand is extremely clear and articulated, but it's clearly they've understood how to make who they are. They're not trying to be anyone they aren't, but they've rooted that. And I think in this world where people become very studied and they read articles and they hire coaches and they do all these other things like that, both Richard and Arie had the superpower in that they just knew exactly who they were. And they tapped in who that was, and that was their brand. And maybe you make some comment about my LinkedIn. It's not like I wake up in the day and I think, I just want to fucking troll everyone who reads my LinkedIn. I just think maybe this would be actually funny. And so I think there's some self-realization, and it helps to be charismatic, and that's really hard to learn and otherwise. But I think in a way they both tap into it, and they both are relentless, but not in this grind set way, in this way that everybody reads on Reddit about how they're supposed to go and grind and be relentless. They just have this zest to do something that matters and something that's bigger. And where does that come from? That's for the psychiatrist couch. But again, it's authentic and it's unique to them. It's not studied. And I think that's part of that, what makes it so powerful.
The internet community or industry or whatever you want to call it, we need more of that. My father is a small business owner and he does all of his business via phone. And I used to sit in his office and he'd be like, I remember he just like would call someone and be like, hey, sweetheart, look, what's money amongst friends, right? It's just money. We got to make something work here. Like, just like this, like charm, sweet talk. I remember hearing this, or just like little things like, look, it's a little early for you to be busting my balls this morning. Let's make something, just like this, like gift of gab.
Yeah.
We don't have that in our industry. It's significantly more formal. It's like calls are scheduled. Every call is like the default calendar length of the Google Calendar, which is 30 minutes. Like, it's just different. And I actually love that type of stuff.
It's the in-between stuff that makes those things happen. Arie was an agent, maybe like the most super agent of all time. And he definitely understood that. David understood that. He was not a basketball player. He didn't play basketball in college, Commissioner Stern. And he came into a thing and he's dealing with basketball players and coaches in China and international. And it's just, there's like a human connection. There's humor, there's charisma, there's all those things that kind of fit into it. And I remember, a thing that someone else said to me at some point, this guy, Dick Parsons, who had run a big bank and at some point was the chairman of Time Warner and very, very influential. And he said, listen, whenever I do a deal with somebody, I always just leave a little bit extra on the table because you never know when you're going to come back and want to do another deal with them. And the internet is filled with, here's how do you extract maximum value from the other person. Here's how you fucking win in negotiation. And the reality is it's like, maybe there is enough to go around and maybe I'm going to let you have a little wins because I care about our relationship and maybe we're going to do business in the future and everything else like that. So I think, per your dad's story and otherwise, there is a bunch of that. And sometimes it makes it easier. They just sent me this thing. They're like, what do you think about all these things we're proposing? And I just wrote back and I was like, these are seriously mid. And that's like in front of 50 people. So we have this meeting and the guy says to me, listen, my only goal in this meeting is how can we not be so mid? So I'm like, okay, you get my point. And yet I haven't crossed some crazy HR line and you've given it back to me. And so what is the goal? The goal is to actually make something that's slightly better, but it requires, trust and humor. And maybe there's a lost art in Catskills humor in business. And maybe that's going to be my next company after this.
How old are you?
I'm 58 years old.
So you started Overtime when you were 50 years old, and your partner, did I read your partner was 24?
Yeah. When we started, Zach was 22.
That's some Leonardo DiCaprio shit. I like it. So
I would only date founders under 25.
So by the way, the hilarious thing is I saw Overtime and I was like, man, this brand is awesome. Sam, I don't think you're as into kind of like the hoops mixtape culture of
Sam's not about the culture.
Yeah,
like you are, Shaan.
Exactly. I've been waiting for somebody to call Sam out.
Look, more than you know. Come on.
It's all good. So we see Overtime, and Overtime just takes off amongst basically like the young black market in America. It's the coolest brand. It's the shirt everybody's wearing. It's the Instagram page people are following. I'm looking for the founder of this thing. I remember when I first saw it, I'm looking for the founder, and I have an image in my head of what I think the founder of Overtime looks like.
What was the image in your head?
Oh, man, it's some guy, maybe 28 years old. He's got to have some business savvy to him, but I figured it was like a 28-year-old black guy who used to play basketball or is still playing basketball, maybe comes from the music scene as some sort of music promoter or record label exec, because there was definitely like a culture crossover aspect to this where it was not just prospect rankings or shit like that, like not just like a database of athletes, or it was not done that way. And then I see it's Dan Porter, and I meet Dan, and Dan actually really helped us out with Milk Road. Sam, I don't know if I ever told you this, but
no, I didn't know that.
He was, I don't know how we got connected, but he was reading the Milk Road early on. We asked him, big fan of what you did. Can we just get on the phone for an hour? And Dan's like, you got to do this. And he's like, this is working. And I think the instinct when something is working is to kind of button it up and grow up. And he's like, no. That's exactly the thing that's great about this is that it's not as buttoned up, because I think there was a big Bitcoin conference going on. He's like, you should host the anti-conference. It's like, just PBRs in people's backyard or something like that. Just like, what's the counter programming you could do against the traditional thing? And I started asking him about the brand that he built with Overtime. And Dan, you told me you studied soccer clubs and bands and cults, and you wanted to figure out what they did differently. And you shared with me 2 or 3 things that we used at the Milk Road to help grow that brand.
So I definitely learned a lot about brand working for Richard, and he really understood the idea of challenger brand. And I think for me, I was really interested in community, especially coming from gaming. And I was like, what is the challenge around being in the media space and, being tangential to the digital media space? I'm like, it's all content and views. And it's like, you're looking on your phone or somewhere else. And it's like, that's funny, but it could come from anywhere. And so I was like, maybe what the audience wants is a sense of community, a sense of being part of something, belonging to something. I think that was clearly a growth hack for religion thousands of years ago. Like, let's get a place where people can get together and make them feel part of something. And I think people wanted that. And so to me, it's just like, you start from that standpoint and you just start to observe the world around you. So you go to a British soccer game and you realize like they're singing like Sweet Caroline. And you're like, what does Neil Diamond have to do with soccer?
I never understood that.
And it's such a good sing-along song. And then all of a sudden, you're just like, where else can grown men, I guess, aside from church, go someplace and sing at the top of their lungs? And like, why are people fandom? And why do they paint their faces? And I remember I went to a Lil Baby birthday concert at State Farm, and everyone was holding up their phone. And I was trying to make a video to put on my story to show that I was valid. And all of a sudden I realized they were all filming themselves. I was like one of the only people actually filming a concert. Like, they were all content creators. They went to a concert as a platform for them to make content about themselves. And I was like, I'm not that way. But like, to me, it was so fascinating. There's some anthropological understanding about, you ask people which way you point your camera, and at a certain age, you're filming other people, and at a certain age, you're filming themselves. And I just think I've had this relentless curiosity about that. And to me, you can Google brand and you can read a lot of shit that has a high ranking in Google about how to do this and that. But the passion of the soccer team, or the passion that you feel for a sports team, you think about things like the Grateful Dead that just gave away their music and let people record it, when all that would happen when I was a kid is you'd go to a concert and they'd frisk you to make sure you don't have a recording device on you, and how they understood like, well, shit, I could let my fans be the distribution and it could grow 10x bigger than anything else like that. And then all of a sudden, it's not about your song. It's like, well, I have that song at, this show at Nassau Coliseum, and I have this show at Hampton, and I have this song, this version of that. And so I think in a way, like, all of those examples exist out there. And I remember I watched the Travis Scott documentary that's on Netflix, and it's so interesting to me that his audience is so much more passionate about him. They literally cry when they're coming out of the show, and he dives into the stage. And you just ask, there are 100 rappers out there. Why is Travis Scott over here and they're all the way over there? Like, why do people literally go? Do people go to a Lil Uzi Vert show and cry? I don't know. Maybe they do, but I don't think in the same way.
Well, what's that answer?
I spend hours of brain power trying to figure out what that is and reverse engineer it. Because like, why is this person or this brand so much more beloved than the other? Why is Arie so much more effective in his business than other people are? I think for Travis Scott, it's something about the music, but it is something about the fact that he cares so much more about his fans that he is literally able to jump in the middle and be there with him. And then when you magnify that, the symbolism around that, the storytelling, I think even for me, it's, listen, sure, I'm a guy who is not the same as the people who put on my account, but I'm willing to get in there and answer DMs and talk to them and connect them without music and ask them 100 questions. I have this they always have this thing they say, if you can give respect, you can get respect. I don't walk into a room and think that anyone will ever respect me or care about me based on who I am, unless I am the first one to give respect. And I know that every single person in that room, whether they're a 16-year-old hooper or a talent agent or a YouTuber, has something incredibly deserving of respect. And my job is to figure out what that is and honor that and learn about that.
So Overtime's Instagram has 11 million followers, probably, billions of views over the years. And it's one thing to say, I learned a lot from Branson, or I've watched how other brands work and I've noticed these 2 or 3 things. It's like me watching jiu-jitsu versus going in there and rolling with, Hoist Gracie. You've gone there and you've rolled with the Gracies, which means you actually then went and did it with Overtime. Can you talk about a couple of the things that you did intentionally that you think helped build the cult, more of a cult brand? So, for example, the hand symbol.
Yeah, tell me, what's the hand signal?
Every great gang in the world has a hand sign, and so we need a hand sign. And I was like, OT, and they were like, simplify it, make the O, throw up the O.
Which is hilarious. Just imagine your CEO sitting in an office and he's just throwing up symbols. He's like, I'm really working on something today, guys. It's going to be big, okay? What do you guys think? Do you think the O should be oval or more circular? And it sounds silly, but I think you told your people, you're like, if you go to this event and you record, every video, you got to get them at the end to be like, put up the O and say, shout out to Overtime. The same thing. Because I remember, I saw it once, forgettable. Saw it twice, forgettable. Once you see it 25 times and you got the cool high school athletes to do it, it was now it's a thing.
I've had people do it to me at TSA, actually, when they see my shirt and stuff like that. I think it comes back to just, if you want there to be community and you care about community, and that was a premise, you have to give community a way to interact and to share what makes that special with them, right? So I'm a Philadelphia Eagles fan. I live in New York, which is clearly not Philadelphia. I'm walking down the street and I see somebody in an Eagles baseball hat. I say, go Birds. And they're like, go Birds. You've given us this common language to say, I don't know who you are. We might have nothing in common, but we got one thing for sure in common. And so being maybe nerdy or cerebral on that thing, I'm like, what are those things that are going to give our community? They're not just going to be like, hey, my good fellow, I enjoy the content on Overtime. And he says, thus, I do too. Do you prefer TikTok or Snapchat or Instagram? And so instead, you give them this little shout out to Overtime or this hand sign as a way to say, yeah, we're part of this community, this kind of, if you know, not unlike the secrets, right? It's like my father-in-law is always like, I'm going to tell you the secret handshake for our fraternity, but he never gives you the secret handshake. He just tickles your finger or something like that. Oh, sorry, I can't really tell you. I'm like, you're 100 years old. Who cares about the secret handshake? Oh, we're sworn to secrecy. Right? And so you have these things, the secret handshake, knock on the door. What's the password? I can't tell you. I can't let you in, and I think you understand in consuming culture and even pop culture that there are these things that bind people together. And sometimes you got to strong arm them into existence. Using the superpower of social media as a customer relations platform, like a CRM as opposed to a publisher, every single DM to Overtime, and even to me, starts out the same. Yo. I don't know why, but that is apparently a very popular thing for people to DM large accounts. Yo. And you go back and they're like, yo. And the next thing is, oh shit, I didn't think Overtime responded. I mean, I was talking to this 21-year-old kid who works for me, and we were talking about going and doing something. He's like, listen, you all understand, when I was 15, I DM'd Overtime. I just was like, yo, and they DM'd me back. And I'm thinking, not they, you work here, we, but he's saying they. And so I think just figuring out how to connect with people, how to use those superpowers. What are the things that around religion, around cults, their songs, their hand signs, there's things that you wear. Part of the reason that I created this shirt with the O that, eventually all the talented people who work for me made way better and bigger was the people used to steal our content all the time. So we'd go and we'd cover somebody and they'd just rip our video, and then I'd make a watermark and then they zoom the video out of the watermark to crop it. So I was like, what if we just made a shirt with our O on it? Then we have a permanent watermark in our thing. And if they rip our video, then that's fine. Then our O is actually everywhere. We've turned our biggest challenge into our biggest opportunity. And so all of a sudden, there were people with shirts with O's everywhere because people were ripping those videos. And, everyone would say, oh shit, how do I get one of those? Because it must mean you're famous. So the biggest thing we did is for 2 years, we refused to sell it. Well, you can't buy one of those shirts. Like, you have to be on overtime to have that. And then eventually you create so much pent-up demand. And I can't say that was in the deck or the business plan, but as you start to get into a dance and a romance with culture, you start to observe what's happening and you make some kind of audibles around that and you figure that out. But like, to be part of culture is to be part of community, to be what's relevant to happening around you. And, listen, we start a basketball league. Every single startup sports league in America has failed, pretty much. And by the way, the NBA, the NFL, these are 50, 75 years old. And you can think about all these startup football leagues that have spent hundreds of millions of dollars. And it's like, why is OTE, Overtime Elite, a startup basketball league in its 4th season and every other league has gone out of business? Well, it's because we're focused on the audience. We weren't focused on just playing the sport. It's like, what people want? They want more football. They want more basketball. They want more baseball. So it's another league. And it's like, well, they want to know, like, why should I care about this? Why is this league about me? Who is playing? What are the hopes and the dreams of the people who are playing there? Instead, it's like, well, we got a field and we had a bunch of city-based teams and we said, here, America, you like more football. But like, if you can't appeal to the aspects of culture and community and emotion to them, why should they care? And listen, I wasn't a gamer and I made a pretty popular game. I didn't know a lot about ticketing and I started the first live event ticketing company. I like sports. I'm not a sports wizard. I would come in last on a sports quiz show, but it's like, I am more like the consumer in that I don't want to get sucked in. So I'm so deep. So it's like, what is resonating? Oh shit, there's a simple story about that. I'll tell you one side thing that made Overtime big. When we started, I was like, here's Shaan. He's like 6'2". He has an 8-foot wingspan. He plays for George Washington High School. He's a point guard. He shoots 50% for 3. And like, we'd put the video up there because that's what sports is about, stats and all those things. Every single time I removed one piece of metadata, it got bigger. Down to the fact that it was like, Shaan is fucking dope. Boom! Everyone can love that. Because as soon as you tell me Shaan went to George Washington High School, I'm like, I don't know where that high school is. I don't care anymore. As soon as you tell me he shoots X from 3, I'm like, is that good or is that bad? I don't care anymore. So in this weird way, similar to the Draw Something game, the more you can simplify it, the more it's available to everyone. The more you tell me this wine is from this country with this, that, and it's DOC and it's this grape and whatever, I just think like, fuck it, maybe I'm just going to drink tequila.
Can you do this stuff with nerdy products or B2B products, or do you think that it's much harder and only possible for pop culture or consumer products?
I think everything has a story at its core. I always think of this dumb example from like a business book that I read 30 years ago where, where they used to like do door-to-door selling of vacuum cleaners. And the guy would go around and he would tell the person who answers the door, the suction is so strong and it's got these things. And they sold all the features of the product and he sold 10 vacuum cleaners. And then the next guy comes around, he knocks on the door and he just fucking sells you the dream of a clean house. And every time like you find your own salespeople and they're in how many views we have. And this is why our product is so great. And I'm always thinking, just got to fucking sell them the dream of the clean house. And so in a way, there is some abstract simplification at the core of what makes everything great. And the more you know about it, the worse you get and the further away you get at telling that story. So it's like, we have this basketball league. We had the number 2 pick in last week's NBA draft. We had the number 8 pick. We have 4 lottery picks in 2 years. X number of people watched it on here. All these people are playing professionally. And at the end of the day, like somebody from the NBA is like, why do people care about your basketball league? I'm like, because it's their shit. The NBA, that's your shit. That's old people's shit. Like this is their shit. And I can never forget that. I can't be distracted by the fact that, Alex went number 2 and Rob went number 8 and now they're on these max contracts and they went to OTE and whatever. It's like, if you can keep that fundamental core aspect of why it matters in mind at all time and not get sucked down the vortex, I think that's the key.
It's like nearly impossible the bigger you get not to do that stuff. Shaan and I both love UFC. And the reason we like Arie Emmanuel is in part because he owns the UFC, and what Dana White has done there, we love, because like when Sean Strickland fights, you're like, well, this guy, he's a crazy person who just says wildly offensive stuff. And it's really fun because he's insane. Or this guy's from Brazil and he's really scary looking and he doesn't even speak English and he wears a red painting on his face and it's really intimidating looking. They do such a good job of telling a story, even though they're a massive company now and they haven't.
Right. Well, you know what's like, I remember I was a fan at the core of the UFC, and the core of the UFC was every martial art against each other, right? This guy's a stand-up guy. This guy's going to take him to the ground. This guy's a college wrestler. This guy's a judo guy. Like, that is the easiest fucking story to tell in the world. You could even look at the NBA Finals or the Super Bowl or whatever. Ultimately, we're in these rivalries. This city versus that city. This boxer versus that boxer. But if you could abstract to tell me this is actually a story about passing versus running, or this is a story about something else like that, then you're just like, oh, I want to know how that's going to play out. Like, that's so interesting. I was trying to tell people, I went to the EuroLeague championship with all these kind of young people, and Greece was playing Turkey in the semifinals. And they're like, wow, these fans are really passionate. And I was like, yeah, let's talk about the history of two countries, Greece and Turkey. And it's not clear to them, but I'm like, yeah, there's something so elemental at the core of the passion. I think the NBA Finals are amazing. I'm not quite sure that Boston and Dallas have existential beef against each other that go back hundreds of years. So you've got to find some other core elemental story in it. Like, these guys bought their team and these guys drafted their team. Your master, he says your karate is better than my kung fu. If you can stay to that in all those stories, and that's clearly a huge aspect of, I think, what UFC had in the beginning that was so powerful. And I think that's part of Arie's genius, is he does understand at its core, like, what makes you like Mark Wahlberg when he signs him as an actor? What makes these stories kind of simple in a way? Because as soon as you find yourself having to oversell, you've lost the cause. As soon as you're talking about the third switch on the vacuum cleaner that has 7 HEPA air filters, you've lost the whole thing.
That's a great story.
You're fun as shit to talk to. You got like I could hear stories that you say all day.
I'm just trying to figure out how it all works.
Can I ask you like a life advice thing? So, if you were my dad, so you did a bunch of things, right? You were a teacher in schools, then you did Teach for America. You worked for these like high-powered organizations like Virgin and Endeavor with Arie Emmanuel. You started your own company in the gaming space. You started your own company in the media space. If you meet like a 24-year-old, ambitious person who just wants to have an interesting life, want to have a great life, they don't even really know exactly what they want. What's your approach? Like, what does Dan think you should be doing in your 20s? What do you think you should be doing in your 30s? What is like the nutshell of your career advice?
First of all, there's a lot of ways you can learn about the world. I learned about the world by being a public school teacher. I learned about the world by, giving guitar lessons. Like, there's so many different ways. And I think that, so I have this thing where I really don't like to hire people who went to business school. And I'm kind of anti-MBA, because to me, if there's a funnel and it starts when you're like 5 years old, and you ask, why is the sky blue? Why do people walk on 2 legs? That funnel goes through the education system, and then it gets to business school, and then it narrows and it closes, and they're just like, this is the way you do things. And then you've lost all that like pie in the sky, whatever. So I kind of say to young people, like, your 20s, it's like the time for you to get fired from a job, the time for you to stay up way too late and go to a club, time for you to like take a Euro pass across England, a time for your friend to say, I'm going to do this crazy thing. And you're like, yes, the time to just say yes and do all those things and ingest and experience as much of the world as possible. Because all of those experiences come and form you in some way. Like, if I didn't go to the concert, or I didn't sing at a soccer show, or I didn't do any of these other things like that, I don't think I would have ever understood these. But also because the world is so big and so vast. Like, if you haven't, hitchhiked through some other country, or stayed in a hammock somewhere or done anything else like that. You just have no context and appreciation for that. And you think your job is to graduate and then to get the job and then to be the analyst and then the associate and then the this and then the managing director. And now you're on this pipeline, but you've failed to do all these other things. I have a master's degree in 19th century Mexican history that I did while I was working. My focus was the caste war of the Yucatan. People were like, why are you doing that? How does that help you in your career? And I'm like, it doesn't. It just seemed interesting. And like, if you look on my LinkedIn, I'll say it never had any impact. Nobody ever asked me about it. I never got ahead by having a master's degree. I don't do business in 19th century Mexico. I don't know. You just do shit when you're young because that's the time you do shit and you just learn about the world and you experience things and you laugh and you cry and you get out there. And like, if you think it's all about this ladder that you get to this other thing, it really isn't. And every single one of those things that you do that has no rationale is really actually about opening a door to something else. That's kind of my advice.
You have to go to your rate my professor profile. Your top tag,
nice.
Your top tag is inspirational.
Okay.
To which I agree. You are inspirational. Gives good feedback, just like what your coworkers. You said, mid. You're inspirational. You love group projects and get ready to read. Those are your tags for Rate My Professor.
Listen, there is so much from business you can learn from The Wire, from Breaking Bad. You know, all the conference rooms in my last company were named after characters in The Wire. I just think I learned stuff from books. I learned stuff from fiction movies. I learned stuff from listening to a song. I'm just like, you know, I remember like the first time one of my kids' friends said, I went to Irving Plaza and I saw this artist, Billie Eilish. And I was like, who is Billie Eilish? And he's like, I would do anything for Billie Eilish. And I was like, whoa. And I look and she has like one Spotify stream. And I'm like, holy shit, like what is going on here? And you know, what is the thing there? Whatever. She was not marketed. She was discovered. The audience was the one. They were like, she is by Billie Eilish. No executive in a tower somewhere said, you're going to take Billie Eilish now. And so they're all just like, if you unpack why things work in the world and you're willing to get out there and experience them, then I think that that's the opportunity. The one second piece of advice I would give is that a lot of times you think it's about adapting to your environment. I had a student of mine and she went to work at consulting and she was the only one who didn't get a job offer. You know, you get your whatever offer to come back. And she's like, I don't know what's wrong with me. Like I messed up and like, I got to figure out how to change. And they told me I should stop talking so much in meetings or whatever. And I said, you just shouldn't work in consulting. Like you are just you. You are the best version of you. You're just in the wrong situation. And she goes to this startup and they're like, you can't talk enough. And they love her and she's so happy. And I'm like, you're the fucking same exact person. You just got to find the place that celebrates you for who you are. And by the way, you are you and you got to do the best to be the best you can, but you got to put yourself in the best place and you got to think about your inputs. And, you know, your inputs aren't necessarily like, you know, the things that you think they are. They might be going to the Sri Lankan restaurant in Staten Island and having a life-changing roti and just rethinking everything you ever knew about the world.
There's some episodes where in the YouTube comments, people are being like, well, I saw Shaan put his chin on his hand and just stare into the screen. Or Sam just sat back, crossed his arms and kind of had his mouth open and he was just staring at the guest. These guys have a new man crush. I would say this is one of those episodes where I definitely do.
I appreciate you coming on. Thank you for not only this episode, but also helping us when we were doing the Milk Road. It's not even one specific piece of advice you had, but after we talked to you, we were like, we came away with a very strong sense of, okay, cool. We're just going to do this our way. Like, we don't need to conform this in any way. If anything, let's double down into all of the like quirks and weirdness and fun versions of what this could become. And let's just play that out and see what happens. And so that was the one thing that we took away from hanging out with you. And I hope, other people do that too, because I don't think you get that advice. I don't think you get that vibe from most people.
I get that. Listen, I just play the long game. If I could be helpful to you, and then you're successful, and then you buy an NBA team, and then it's the playoffs, and I want my feet on the hardwood, then I'm hoping it pays off.
I got you. Dan, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate you.
I appreciate you guys for having me. See you soon.